Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask you to like us, subscribe, and maybe even support us on Patreon. All of that really helps keep us on the air. So, today's guest was introduced to me via email by Ann Andrews. Now, Ann was on 2 weeks ago. So she was episode 137. This is episode 139. And I need to tell you, as part of my introduction to our guest, uh, Ann's introduction. So Ann said, "Your question to me during the podcast about quantum healing sparked the thought of a woman I know in Australia. And I'm wondering if you are open to recommendations for future guests. She leads an intuition play circle that meets twice a month via Zoom that I've participated in for about 14 months now. It is such a joy for me. First, because her approach to the circle is quite different than how I run mine. And second, because it's become my me time. Anyway, she's an accomplished artist, author of a couple of books, and an energy healer. We've been playing with her quantum healing techniques recently, and there are reports of good results. So, this is by way of introduction to Jenny McFadden. She's a 3-time best-selling author, her most recent being The Game of Intuition and How to Play It. With a career of more than 30 years dedicated to whole person health, she blends quantum healing, energy medicine, psychology, creativity, and Qigong into a uniquely powerful approach. She helps heart led people develop deep trust in their intuition, use it to decode the messages hidden within their symptoms, and receive practical steps to restore well being, vitality, and happiness. Through creative intuition games, she invites people to move into a space of curiosity and play and discover how easy it is to receive clear and accurate intuitive guidance. She's seen extraordinary shifts happen in an instant when we work at the quantum level. And the more we listen within, the more we remember who we truly are, limitless and powerful beings, far more than just a physical body. So, with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jenny McFadden, who is in New South Wales, Australia. And if you're not sure where that is, it's on the southeastern corner of Australia, and Sydney, Australia, is part of that state. So, Jenny, uh, as always, I'm going to ask you to discuss your spiritual journey from childhood till now, and then we'll get into some questions and your book.
Thank you, Bob. I am really excited to be here. This is awesome. So much fun. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to Anne also for putting us in touch with each other. And I want to start by saying, I've listened to a lot of your guests and amazing stories, especially, on their spiritual journey. It's sort of like some of them are sort of like hit by bolts of lightning and near-death experiences and like amazing things, right? That's not been my background. I think of my story a bit more like doing a painting. I relate it more to like you got to start with an underpainting, and then there are all these layers and different things happen as you go along, and somewhere in the middle it gets really messy and really uncontrollable. You don't know where you're going, and then eventually it all starts to come together. And that's how I think of my journey. And in the beginning, for me, the underpainting, like when if I don't know if you've ever done this, but when you start a painting and you've got a white blank canvas, it's kind of scary. You kind of go, I don't know how to start this. And a lot of people get stuck at that point. So I relate to that because when I came in as a kid, I was really shy. I was very shy. I sort of like had the same a lot of fear. I came in with a lot of fear, and um, that sort of set the tone for who I was in the beginning. But as I got older, there were these parts of the painting that some of them were difficult, and some of them were fantastic. So that's what I want to talk a bit about today, and how I got to be where I am, because I never thought ever that shy kid would be sitting here talking to you, being a teacher, being someone who talked about quantum healing, being someone who talked about energy medicine. Come on. I never thought ever that is what I would be doing. I mean, I grew up in a household that was very Christian. So, Church of England. So, in Australia, a lot of course, a lot of us are from English backgrounds. So, it was Church of England. And so I went to Sunday school, every week, and, had a the typical Aussie childhood, which is growing up free, with your doors open and doing whatever, you're playing games and with kids down the street, and, had a loving household. I was loved and supported. So there was really, but I was very shy. And when I went to school, I had the upbringing is like, it's the very rational, it's the very logical. That's how school teaches us. And so for me, I was really, you know, all the intelligence is in the head, as opposed to say now it would be more in the heart, right? But it was more all about the learning, the intelligence, the heart, being in the head. And my greatest love at that time, like at school, although I was, did well, my favorite subject was art. And so I've always been a creative. I've always thought of myself as a creative. I was encouraged by my mom, who was also had a creative background and was a psychologist. And so um, through school, when I left school, I wanted to go to art school, and I didn't get in. I wanted to be an art teacher. I didn't get in. First time, it like really disappointed. Doesn't seem like much, but actually, it was at one of those turning points. You look back, and I look back on the spiritual journey now, and I go, that was the best thing that could have happened. It's just at the time, I didn't think it was. And so I ended up going to uni. I ended up studying psychology, and I did fine arts. And I ended up getting a teaching scholarship. So here's this shy kid learning to be a teacher. Like, how did that happen? So it's like that's quite a challenge as being so. But it was all in order. It was all in order. I just didn't know it at the time. So I went to uni, and I did psychology. I did fine arts, and later doing a degree and going to uni was actually one of the things that was really helpful. I didn't know it was going to be part of the story, but it actually turned out to be something that was actually really important. So, I actually did become an art teacher, and I taught in school for a while, and that was in the 80s. And then I got married, and we were going on this trip to Europe, that backpacking type of thing, And this was one of those, this was the first wake up call. So I would not have called myself intuitive at any point during that time. I'd had a few experiences of things like that, but everyone just talks about it as coincidence. And
How
you know,
old were you at this point?
I was 26 by
Okay.
the time we went on this trip, and so we were going around Europe and this and that, and suddenly I had this I couldn't stand up. I was really dizzy. We were, uh, in the south of Italy, which is where my husband was from. And I couldn't stand up. I couldn't travel anymore. I didn't know what was wrong with me. South of Italy is really not a place you want to be if you're ill. And in the 80s, I remember I actually went to the hospital. I traveled from the mountains where I was. I went to the hospital. And I remember going there and seeing these four guys sitting around the table smoking and thinking, I mean, these must be the cleaners. Yeah, they were the doctors. It gives you kind of an idea. It was different than being in Australia at that time. Anyway, this sudden illness meant that I eventually used my travel insurance to come home, and I went into hospital. And it was just one of those experiences. They didn't know what was wrong with me. Eventually, they found out it was actually a neck injury. So I had this incredible dizziness. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't work. And I really thought at that point, it was one of those experiences like, I thought, is this the end of me? Is this, that's that kind of like moment of like, this could be it. They don't know what's wrong with me. This might be it. So it's facing mortality. So it wasn't, but the experience of that led me to that first wake up call of like, go inside and ask yourself, is this where you want to be in your life right now? Because I knew when I got married, looking back, I'd had a few insights around this isn't really, because we've been together for 8 years, so it was sort of that progression of you just do what comes next. But actually, that was not really where I was meant to be. So this is looking back like one of the first soul call wake ups. And so I left that marriage. It was really difficult. We'd only been married for a couple of years, and it was not his fault. It was me going within and saying this is not my path, and it completely changed my life. It asked me to prioritize the things that what is it that you really want here, and I went, "Yeah, it's just I guess I know I'm not supposed to be here." So everything changed. I changed where I lived. I changed how I dressed. I changed how I looked. I became a rebel. I started taking risks. I was much more courageous. Like the shy kid disappeared even further. So I see that as like it was a pivotal time because it was setting me up for really the first points of getting in touch with myself, really understanding what I'm going through on the inside, asking the questions that make me go inside. And it was also the first time I'd come into contact with alternative medicine, because actually the person who helped me heal was an osteopath. And in the 80s, osteopaths weren't really seen as mainstream. And this guy was not either. He was a doctor, he was trained as a doctor, but he developed his own technique. So he was the one that actually helped me get well. So it also led me to start to really go, hey, there are other things out there besides mainstream. I became more open, I became more available to considering things like that. And after that, the next really, it's all of this was setting me up. You look back and you go, okay, I see how I got to where I was. All of these things started to come together. And in 1991, the story will tell you what this part is about. Is my mum and I were standing in the kitchen, and she came out of the bedroom wearing these green pants that wouldn't do up, that she'd only bought a few weeks before, and she couldn't get them done up anymore. And she came out with this look of despair on her face. And I'm there and I'm going, yep, because I had spent my life, and so had she, dieting. Like both of us are born with the same body shape as she has. We're larger, more curvy women. And she was actually, when I was a kid, she was in women's magazines for being this star dieter who lost all this weight because it had always been something that she needed to do. And I had the same body, and I'd started dieting when I was 14. Same thing. I don't look like, I'm not the shape that everybody is. It's this and this. So I look back and go, I came in with a body that also led me to what my purpose is. Because at that point, mum and I went, you know what? We've been dieting for a combination between us of like 40 years. Is this really working? And the answer was no. We dieted my way up. So every time you lose weight, you lost it, you gained more. And so it's this ever increasing um, weight gain, which is totally the opposite of what it's supposed to be
Yeah.
about. And both of us realized at this point that this is not working. And in fact, both of us had what I would now call a diet disorder. Because what happens when you repeatedly diet is you get this real focus on what you have to be, how much you weigh, what you've got to eat. And then if you eat something you're not supposed to have, you feel guilty. And if you don't eat the things, if you don't, if you can't eat other things, so you feel deprived. So you're always living in this state of fear that you're going to be. It's like you're not going to have, or you've had too much, so it's this terrible thing that dieting leads us into that's invisible. because it's in our heads, and there's no recognition that there's this emotional side um, to managing food and weight. And when I say emotional, it's not that someone's got an emotional problem, because that's what it used to be about. But it's really about understanding that we eat for all kinds of different reasons. Everybody does. We eat because it's to celebrate. We eat because we're feeling lonely. We eat because you name the emotion, and we'll often eat in response to it. And what we've lost is touch. We've lost touch with our own body signals. So the reason why this is really important is because it was the first time, well, not the first time, but it was one of the next really key pieces, which is listen to your body, because that's what I lost. And it's what a lot of people retain. Kids have it, some people retain it, but I lost it through dieting. Because I started listening to my head. What you're supposed to eat, how much you're supposed to have, how many calories it's in it. You name the diet, I did it at least once. And so what I lost touch with was listening to my own body, listening to its signals, and also listening to what else is going on at other levels. So this was like my introduction. It's kind of like intuition 101 without knowing it. And it was a really important thing that I did for many years. It was we had well, after we got together, we we developed a program for ourselves, and that program, which was called Nectar, so we were standing in the kitchen and we were going, well, what is this really about? And we thought, well, it's about natural eating, which actually didn't, at that time, there was no term like intuitive eating, but that's what we meant. We called it natural eating. And control theory was the CT. Control theory was something that my mum, who's a psychologist, had been trained in recently. I actually came from the US, from also called choice theory and later called perceptual control theory. But it's a form of psychology, applied psychology, that is about internal control. So it's recognizing that the control is within. What is outside of us does not control us, including events, including people. None of that is what's in control of us. We are internally motivated, internally controlled. So that's what we did, and we combined it with natural eating, and the AR was results. So it was natural eating, control theory, and results. So we called it Nectar. And then the book was published in the USA in 1993. And then in 1995, it was published in Australia by Penguin, and it was a bestseller here. And we ran programs, and I did lectures, and we taught here and in the US, and it did this for about 10 years. And the key part about it was understanding that perception is the key. And this is really important because it relates later to when I started reading A Course in Miracles. And I started seeing it's exactly the same message, because A Course in Miracles says a miracle is a shift in perception, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, later, I didn't know this now, but once again, it's like this the painting is starting to form. All these pieces, the things are starting to come together, these layers. It was only later I could see it all in together. But it was a key thing, and I taught it for many years. I taught it to health professionals, used it in my own practice. And it's it was a really key piece, the only piece it didn't have, because it was saying, the outside world is not in our control. What we can control is what we do within and how we respond, both emotionally with our thoughts, and how to change that, and it's really amazing, amazing stuff. I taught it for many years, and I trained in this as a practitioner for about 10 years. And the thing that it didn't have, the piece that it didn't have the piece that says you're creating the outside world. You're creating it. That was the piece I didn't really get until a bit later. But I can see how I was coming to understand, I was waking up bit by bit. So, what happened then was that, because I started to work with a lot of women, I also started to then ask questions about, well, what else is going on? Because sometimes women would say to me, I'd be talking about how to listen to their body, and they'd be saying, I don't feel anything below my neck. I would go, and then I started to ask questions about, well, why is that? So I started to ask about unconscious. I started to ask about hypnosis. So I learned NLP, I learned hypnosis, I learned other things to get into the unconscious, to understand what's going on, not just in the cognitive side, but also what's going on with unconscious and how to bring those things together. And so I taught the Nectar program, I taught the ideas, and I taught also um, the applied psychology, the PCT, perceptual control theory, to lots of different people. And um, I think what I really got from we called our book was the book was called Diet No More. And what I really got from teaching this to people for myself was how to be vulnerable. Because I talked about my own story. I talked about me and the things that people do when they diet, when you have a diet disorder, when you've been dieting for a long time. And you don't have to be overweight. They can be beautiful looking women, but they've still got the same problem. You can't see it, you can't tell. That's what I learned. But I used to go and talk about my own story, and my own story in this is always talking about things that were hidden, the behaviors that people didn't talk about, the overeating behaviors, there are some, it's called eating disorders, but they're not really in that category. Ordinary people are having these behaviors all the time, hiding their eating. And so for me, it was a very vulnerable thing to do, was to actually talk about these things that nobody talked about. And it took a lot of courage to tell the truth. But that's what I did. And that was really powerful for me in understanding how powerful that is for everybody else. And I think that's one of the things that I came to understand about myself is I want the truth. I want the truth that I have so people can be okay and understand they're not alone in what they're experiencing. And I think I'm quite grounded in that way. It's still part of me that I've retained a lot, which is understanding I'm very practical in my approach, but also spiritual in thinking about how does that work for me and understanding myself. Who am I really? And the remembering path, remembering who am I? I would use that term now. I didn't use that before, but that's how I would talk about it now. Anyway, in 2000, I met my husband. I have a story about this. This is one of those where you go, really, that happened? So I met my husband at a dance class, and um, he wasn't really. He was like still attached to some girl, that other girl that had shown up before, right? And did not expect that. I just there was some knowing that happened, and I remember doing this manifestation process that I'd seen. This is way before The Secret. Anyway, it was this circle, and you had to write in the circle all the things you wanted, and on the outside you wrote all the things you didn't want, and then you fold it up and put it away, which I did. And I wrote that on the 29th of April, 2000. On the 29th of April, 2001, I had my son with Steve, which I didn't actually know at the time that it was the same date because I put this piece of paper away and forgot about it.
Uh-huh.
So I can tell the story in retrospect. I didn't know then. Anyway, so we did get together, right? So I completely forgot. I only discovered this piece of paper again about 2007 when I was actually teaching. I was teaching workshops on relationships. And how we create relationships through us, through our energy, through who we're being, and all of that. So that's what I was, I found this, and I was like, that's that same thing. You go, I opened it and went, oh my gosh, this is that. I didn't realize. Like here's the evidence. When you work
Yeah.
this way and you set intentions and you're working from something that you really have a knowing about, we're creating our reality. And that date was really significant again later. And it's I don't know how honestly, I've no sometimes I just don't have the answers for why. But when later down, this is like more recently, so I'll skip ahead a little bit. The 29th of April, a bit later on, I wrote two other books. One was with a group called the Soul Circle, who've been together with me for many, many years now. And we wrote a book together. It's called Seed of Intuition. And guess what date it was published? 29th of April. Right? Not intentionally, because I had no control over that. Because when
Yeah.
you submit your book to Amazon, you don't know when it's going to be published, right? It goes through all this process and this and that. I wrote my own book the next year. Guess what date it was published? How does that happen? I don't know. I just think it's the universe having fun. I think it's the sense of humor. I think it's like, you
Uh,
know,
uh,
I just think it's the sense of humor because you just go, "Oh, that's so funny." Anyway,
so
so that's my that was
that first book was with Dr. Judy? Is that
um, no, my the first book was with my mum, whose name is Judy as well.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
right. Yeah, because there are two Judys. There's Judy, my mum, and then there's Dr. Judy, who is the doctor that I met when I realized I could do medical intuition stuff. So I'll
Okay.
tell you about her in a sec. So the
Okay.
first book was like with my mom, who's a psychologist, Judy. She's still alive. She's 95 now. And the second book was The Seed of Intuition, which was with my group. And that's another story in itself about how things come together that I got a message that was going to happen. I was like, okay, how? And then the third book was this one, The Seed of Intuition, which is just me.
Okay.
Um, so I guess at this point, I was starting to play around with energy. I was starting to understand about intuition. But I didn't really know. I still, like I say, it was a layering. It was bit by bit. Things were starting to come together. In 2002, my son had eczema, and I went to doctors. They gave me all this thing. Nothing worked. I went, and the last time I went, I said, if this doesn't work, I'm taking him to a kinesiologist because someone had told me about it. Didn't work. I took him. She did sort of muscle testing through me for him, discovered he had a wheat problem, took him off wheat, he was a different kid. Next day, within a day, 2 days, he was a different kid. And I thought, I have to know how to do that. And this was my introduction to energy. So I went back to school when I was 44. I thought, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I got to do this. So I went and I found the most rational teacher I could find because I was still pretty like, I don't know about this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did kinesiology, and that was when I started stuff started to open up that I didn't really understand about that was opening up. Because the more I worked with people really closely, and I listened, and I already knew that I knew things, but I didn't really. I just thought everybody did that. But when I did kinesiology, it led me into the world of energy medicine, and it led me into understanding how does this work. You know, Chinese medicine, meridians, all of that stuff. And it's when I learnt EFT, it's when I learnt reconnective healing, it's when I realized that when I get the tingles, that's energy. I would get this tingling going up and down my spine. I thought, things like that, the signs that something is going on. And then I had this dream. I've only had two like it. And it was this dream. I had this dream that my grandfather, who was passed away at the time, came to me, stood in front of me, and it was like one of those dreams that you wake up and go, "Was that real?" It was so real in every way. He stood in front of me and and got my attention, and then he moved aside, and my mother came and stood in front of me, and my mother was still alive, and put out her hands and said to me, "I have blood cancer." And I woke up with the start, with the shock, I didn't know what to do with this information. I had started I'd been doing reconnective healing, which is a hands off. I would call it quantum healing now, but it wasn't called that then. And I had started to have, when I would work with people, I would start to get things in my mind, as people do. Even massage therapists say that they start to know things.
Mhm.
You're working in the energy of somebody, and I wouldn't know. Like, I would get images of like teddy bears and something. I said to someone, "I'm getting like this," and it's Simon. He goes, "Yeah, that's my team." I'm like, "How do I even know that?" Anyway, I had this dream, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I realized that I it was the culmination of realizing I was getting intuitive messages about things, about people's health, about their body when I was working with them, and I didn't know what to do with it. But I realized, I knew that it was called medical intuition. I knew that's what it was. Someone had said it to me, and we're still here in the sort of early 2000s, and Carolyn Mace was sort of becoming more well known at that time.
Mhm.
But my intuition stuff was not chakra based, which is more how she was working, and it didn't. I didn't resonate. I had to find someone here, and of course, don't you know it? I went to my kinesiology class and asked them, "Does anybody know any?" And someone said, "Yeah, there's Dr. Judy over in Eastern Suburbs." I was like, "Oh, great." And then the next day, in one of these we had these newspapers that were, I suppose, the spiritual community. I saw this ad for a Qigong master who was coming to Sydney, like the next week. It was a medical intuitive. I'm like, of course, right? I'm organising this. This is all being organised for me. So I went to see Judy, and I went to see, so her name's Judy Moss, and I went to see Glenys Brown, who is a Qigong master. And I talked with both of them, and they're both now my best friends, right? So over the years, we've worked together continuously. And Judy is a medical doctor who had one of these more like Kundalini awakening type things, the big story.
Mhm.
And we started to work together, and she started to teach me, because this was new for her, and it was new for me. And we have continued to work with each other for 20 years, and we see each other every 2 weeks. And we continue to work on intuitive games, intuitive processes, what's new, how do we use that? Like, this is where this book comes from, but also all the work I've been doing with her in the last 20 years. So that's one part of the story. And the other part of the story is meeting Glenys, who said to me at the time, you this is where I understood about my groundedness. She said, "You're really grounded, and Qigong will help you open your intuitive channels," which it did. So I was teaching Qigong, I was working with Judy, and I started teaching intuition as well. I realized everybody needs to know how to do this, because I was a practitioner, and I started to, before someone would come and see me, I would kind of read their energy. I would, so what is going on? Because they're coming for a digestive issue or something like that. So I was working as a holistic sort of health practitioner, come healer, come sort of help people with change and how to, heal themselves. And someone would come, like, say, with a digestive issue, and I would look at their body first from a distance and see what's really going on. And I realized the body would take me where it needs to go. Its intelligence knew exactly what the issue really is. One time I was working, and I'll give you a story about this, is someone who was coming with a digestive issue. And when I tuned in, what really was there was grief. But how I got that information was I heard a song. I heard this song in my head by Elton John, called Daniel. And the lyrics go something like, "Daniel, my brother, you are older than me," something, something, something. And I was like, why am I thinking about that? Anyway, I wrote it down, and I wrote down what I got, and I went back to her and I said, "Look, this is what's coming." And I told her the story. She looked at me and she said, "That's exactly what's happened. It was not long ago, I lost a friend of mine who was older than me." So it was a guy who was older than me, and I haven't been able to process it. So it was like, I realized, the body is so intelligent. It knows where the answers are. And when working with Judy, sort of like in the medical way, but working with Glennis in an energetic way, but she was also a medical intuitive too, but she did it through chakras. So I learned kind of all the ways that they did it, and we all worked together. And so I was able to help people in that way. Another time, I remember a lady coming to see me, and when I tuned in, it was also a digestive issue. I think can't remember exactly, but um, I remember the message I got from her body was, "I'm afraid of dying before before my child is old enough," because she was a single mom. I didn't know that at the time. Single mom with a young child. I mean, these are the sort of things that we're all able to do if we practice. When I first realized I had medical intuition, I used to see it in like I would be out shopping, maybe I may having a coffee or something like that, and I would practice. People would walk past and I would just go, I wouldn't ask them, I would just notice. It's a noticing. So I wasn't intruding, I was just notice. Oh, shoulder problem. Gallbladder problem. I would just, because it was a way for me to notice. And for me, noticing is still a really key thing. It gets me out of my head. I would just notice the energy. I would notice what's the pattern. I would notice what's the message that's coming to me. So this is like me really becoming something I never thought I would be, ever.
Yeah.
I never ever thought the practical the head intelligence person was going to be someone who worked as a medical intuitive. But what I realized after a while was I need to stop doing this for people. It's much more powerful if someone can do it for themselves. And that's why I started teaching about how you can be your own intuitive. For years, I've been teaching how to be your own intuitive. How do you do that? How do you tune in? How do you know? How do you trust yourself? How do you know when it's not right? How do what are the ways you can get out of your head? And that's why the games are so important. That's why it's because play and curiosity is the number one way to get out of the head. As soon as you say, I wonder, your energy expands. As soon as you go back to being a kid and you remember what it's like to just have fun and be curious and go, oh, that's fun, like your energy changes completely. And it's one of the key things to being able to get messages clearly and accurately. Of all things, that's what it is. It's play and fun and curiosity. And that's why it's really hard to get the messages when you're tired, you're cranky, you're worried, you're in pain, you're fatigued, like all the reasons. There are all kinds of reasons why it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's one of the ways to get back in. So so I got this message like, you need to not stop doing this for people. And then I got the message, you need to stop using all tools. Once I got the message, my guidance said, stop using all tools. Because I was working in a traditional sort of healing center, you've got the
Yeah.
massage table, you've got all your stuff, your books, your this, your that, your crystals, blah, blah, blah. The message was, you need to stop using all tools. I was like, oh my gosh, that's scary. But I knew it was something I had to do. So I went, okay. And it's like all these turning points, right? It's like teaching me, you know what you know. You know how to do this. You know how to help people. You need to help them be able to do it themselves. Stop doing it for them. And trust yourself. Trust what you know. Like this is like these are the key messages, still the key messages. And so I thought, how's it going to happen? Sure enough, a friend of mine said to me, look, you could use my office, which is in this really tall building in Bondi Junction. You've probably heard of Bondi, which is not near me. It's about an hour away from me. And it's in this big, it's an office overlooking Sydney Harbour.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like, are you kidding? I said, how much is that going to be? She said, oh, $80 a week would be enough. I'm like, are you joking? Like, I'm serious. This is like, This is like a $500 a day
Yeah.
office. This is where you go, like, "How does that work?" And I'm going, "Okay, that's where I'm going." So that's where I went. And I think that was part of the process of, well, of really realizing we heal ourselves. We don't need the tools. They're great, they're fun, we can still use them, like, they're awesome, but we don't actually need them. When we go inside and we ask our own knowing, our wisdom will give us the things that we need to do to come back to balance. And they're usually easy. It won't be something complicated. It'll be things that we know how to do. It'll be stuff we already have because everything is frequency, everything is energy. So if someone doesn't have a particular supplement, for example, that they think, well, that's really going to be the solution, the body will come up with something else. Your intelligence, the universe, Google out there, universal Google knows exactly how
Yeah.
you can achieve the same result. And it might be that something really simple. For example, it could be that you actually need to drink more water. It might be that. So these are the things I ask people in a practical sense. But this is what I learned from this experience, which was really powerful for me. It was scary, but it was powerful. And it's also when I started to learn more about quantum healing. I did something called matrix energetics with Richard Bartlett. Amazing, amazing guy. He just passed away recently. He's still out there. I'm sure he's working with me somewhere. And he did amazing work, incredible work. He wrote a book called The Physics of Miracles. And this is where the physics and all the quantum sort of the understanding that we have, for me, came from. I already knew some of it. He really went into it. And he was like a wizard. Seriously, even looked like a wizard. The stuff he did was incredible. I could never kind of get the same results that he did in that way. I think his energy, he was just amazing. He's ahead of his time. But what I learnt from him are the principles of what I'm using now and continue to use and have integrated because they were the truths still of
Yeah.
what quantum healing is really about, which is about the field of the heart. It's about, we don't have to understand the physics to make it work. And that's me being practical again. But I love the physics. I find it really interesting. But a lot of my friends go, I don't want to know about the physics. Don't worry about it. Like just tell me how to do it. I'm like, okay, so I like it. But he was really pivotal in my journey. But also who was really pivotal, and I know you'll love this, when I was doing Qigong and I was working with Glennis, my Qigong master, and every Qigong master has a gift. Her gift was medical intuition. She had a near-death experience. So she had the big wake-up call again. And she could really read diagnoses, which is, she would actually hear a diagnosis. I was more like, my medical intuition was more like, would notice the emotional stuff and the story of what's going on. She's amazing. She's still awake. She's still around. Um, but I remember I was doing this session with her one time about, well, who are my guides? And I'd done this once before and seen this whole ballroom full of people. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. But I didn't really know. I was like, hmm. And I remember seeing, this particular, uh, you know, process that I was doing with someone. And I remember seeing this other little guy there. And I did this other, Glennis led me through this who's your guide thing. And I said, "Oh, there's this little guy there." And I described what he looked like. And she said to me, "I know who that is." I said, "Who is it?" She goes, "It's Edgar Casey." I went, "Oh, cool." So I thought, I knew a bit about him, but I didn't know a lot. And so I went and looked up, excuse me. I went and looked him up and I realized, okay, maybe that's who's been working with me all this time for medical intuition. Maybe he's the guy that's been
Uh-huh.
around me, kind of like working with me. So that was my introduction as well, or really connecting with Edgar Casey
So
in a proper way, in a sort of.
tell us how you helped your hip problem when that came about.
I don't know. I can't remember.
It's in the
I might have
book.
forgotten that story. I've probably forgotten the story. You better tell it to
Yeah.
me.
Well, the Edgar Casey, go-to remedy of a castor oil pack.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Bob. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Still use it today. Still use it today. So that's when I learned about some of his remedies, and I realized how powerful they are. I still use that today. I
Yeah.
still use the castor oil packs,
I just
and they still
reminded my
work.
wife because she's having some sciatica type issues, and I said,
Yep,
"We've got the castor oil, we have the flannel, let's do it." Because
yep.
your book reminded me of, "Oh, yeah, we have these remedies around. Let's use
Yeah,
them."
thanks for reading it. Thanks for reading as well, I appreciate it. Yeah, look, ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Ahead of his time, amazing guy.
Okay,
So,
so
yeah,
you
that's where all these pieces start to come together.
yeah, you have this fun game approach to all of this stuff. Now, in your book, you only have, what, 6 games
Mm.
out of you say you've got at least 100 games up your sleeve.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, tons.
So, I just wanna say to the audience, I subscribe now to your intuition bite-sized messages, uh,
Oh, thank you.
and you just had one come out, yesterday that talked about color and the importance of color, and I know you're wearing a tie-dye shirt or blouse because you always wear tie-dyed things, right?
I do.
Because they make people smile and wanna talk with you. Well, we have a yellow car, and
Mhm.
we got a yellow car mainly because it's easy to find in a parking lot. But people constantly stop us and comment on our bright, happy looking yellow car, and it makes them smile. And so your message about color really resonated with me. So I decided for the first time on this podcast to wear a colorful shirt. And this is I'm usually always wearing monotone colors. I try to keep with color. Uh, but this is probably the happiest shirt that I've worn on this program. So if you're watching on YouTube rather than listening, you'll get to see my colorful shirt. But I I loved your story about tie dye, and as I read through your intuition, bite sized, uh, I have to say that I enjoy not only there but in your book the depth at which you go with these because you not only talk about the concept and you get people to go ahead and ask a question and imagine things and use their imagination. Uh, but then you have them ask follow up questions. And that reminded me of Ann Andrews' process in the process that I did with her, because she actually did an Akashic record reading with me uh, after the program, after we taped the episode. And she is very good at making sure she asks follow up questions. Now, there's a tie in there because Casey was all about the Akashic records. That's where he got all of his medical information. Uh, and I wonder about the Akashic records. Do you have a relationship with them yourself? And is that where you feel some of this information comes to you from?
Good question, Bob. Over the years, I have wondered the same thing. It was called the Akashic Records years ago. I prob Now I think of it as it's all the same place,
Mm.
where all the information from comes from the same field, the same I guess, Akashic records, I don't think they're in a different place.
Yeah.
I think it's the same information. For me, it's just like I'm going to God, I'm going to the Akashic records, I'm going to the field, I'm going to the universe, I'm going to the, and so I will ask, who am I talking to? Who's my connection?
Yeah.
Every time. But for me, it's the same place. The information isn't any different. So, and I think in different cultures they call it different things, and I think maybe it's because of, where as we evolve and as science evolves, we have different names for different things.
Right.
And for me, yeah, it's the same. It's the same place. And I have a friend who does hypnosis who works in the Akashic records, and we can sort of conceptualize it as this place of books and
Mhm.
of information. I
Yeah.
did have one time. I This was years ago before I really before quantum science was really more available. I remember doing a meditation where we went into, and I found my, like, where did we come from? And I found myself in a library,
Uh-huh.
cosmic library somewhere, right? And I was like, I'm a library keeper. I'm like, where am I? Like, I didn't understand that then, right? But I guess same thing.
Yeah.
So, and for me, whenever we get information from the field, from the universe, from God, from however we want to think about it, to me, it's the same thing. It's like I said before, sometimes I'll call it universal Google. It's like much better than the earthly one. It's
Yeah.
got all the information you need. As we do that, our system, our energy, and our brain have to translate that information so that we can understand it.
Yeah.
And often but it will come through to us in a way that we can understand, or that we can visualize, or that might come through a sound, or it might come through. This is the way that, as a physical being, we need to be able to translate the information that we're getting as it comes through the body, as it comes through our energy system. And there are different ways that our system does that.
Yeah.
And often it can work with our knowledge as well. If we've heard of the Akashic Records, it might come in that way. Like I said, mine wasn't called that, but it looked like a library.
Uh-huh.
But it was a way for me to understand. It was a way for me to conceptualize something. That's how I think of it.
Right. So I know that you are leading uh, a retreat coming up in September, and this
Mhm.
episode will still air in August. So people will have a chance to uh, sign up for your retreat if they want. So do you want to talk about that for a minute and what people can expect to get out of that retreat?
Yep. So it's an art and soul retreat. So it's the first. This is actually an in-person one. So this would be only going to people who live in Sydney. So that's so if you live in Sydney, get in touch with me. And my plan will be to eventually bring that online. I just got to figure out the best way to do that, because when I'm working with someone to help them with creative things, I find it a little more difficult doing it over Zoom.
Right.
So this is my first in-person one. So, but essentially what, as you've like sort of, already talked about, is I bring in a lot of creativity to working with intuition. To me, it's the same energy. Creativity and intuition, same thing, same energy, same flow. And it comes through me when I create. It feels like I'm being intuitive. It feels like the same space. It feels like the same thing. So what I like to do is help people to actually express their intuition through their creative energy. And I use watercolor to do that. That's what this one is going to be about. And it's over a period of 4 weeks. The other thing that people can do is I have, as I've talked about, which Anne is involved in, is the circles. So I have two circles that I started in the last couple of years. One is called the wisdom circle, and one is called the intuition circle. The reason the difference is that one runs twice a month and one runs once a month, and one of them has men in it and one of them doesn't. And
Oh, you
um,
do work
so
with
that's
men.
yes.
Okay,
So that only started this year, Bob, right?
that's good to
That only
know.
started this year because a couple of guys said to me, "Hey, can we come?" I was like, "Oh," because I suppose my history has been with all the weight stuff. It's always been women that
Uh-huh.
I've worked with, but that happened this year. So yeah, there is a what did we say? What did we say now? It's all gender.
Uh-huh.
group. So that's a way that people who are not in Australia can come in if it's in the right time zone. And I know I do say Anne does get up early to come and be with us. And I am thinking about starting one that's in a better time. So it'd be morning for me and afternoon for you, that kind of thing. So that's the way that someone can work with me. Also one-to-one, I do one-to-one work,
Yeah.
sort of VIP stuff. Um,
Well, I will have a link to your website on my website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com. Uh, do you want to mention your website, how they can get to it?
yeah, sure. It's jennymcfadden.net, and they'll find some resources on there. The other thing is I created a resource recently called Activate Your Inner Healer, which is just something I've just made, and it's a series of videos. And that's because my focus is very much still around health,
Yeah. Okay.
particularly for intuitive people who are finding it difficult to tune in because there's a diagnosis, a health challenge, fatigue. And it's a series of 3 short videos to actually help someone be able to tune in the way that I do it, which is a combination of Qigong and heart
Yeah.
coherence, and how to a really simple way, sort of a fun way to make sure that you're actually tuned in, using your eyes. And again, at the end,
Of
which is
course.
the intuition message bank game. Of course,
Of
right?
course there's a game.
Because that's the idea. Want to make it easier. So
Yeah.
I'll give you a link for that so people can get a hold of that too.
Okay, at the end of each podcast, I always give the guests an opportunity to leave this particular audience with a few words of wisdom. So you've listened to a few of these, you said, so you knew
I
this
have.
was coming, right? So you've got about 2.5 minutes.
All right. I've got a simple message. And my message is your body never works against you. It's always speaking for you and to you. And your intuition is the way that you can translate those messages. Your symptoms are the way your body speaks to you. And if you choose a symptom that's been bothering you, you can tune into your intuition, into your inner knowing, and ask, if this symptom had a message for me, what would it be? It's just a simple way of asking to get you to, so we can really understand that we do have the answers within us. And what we're looking for is just the next step. And that one question can open the door to something you didn't know that you knew, and to changes that you didn't think were possible.
Okay. Well, audience, as always, take what you've heard and incorporate into your life that which resonates with you, and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.